Hello, all. My name is Blake. Welcome. Today I'm bringing you my February wrap up. I managed to read 6 books and 1 novella in the month of February. A lot of them were lower ratings, but I did have a 5-star, so my average rating ended up being about 3 stars. And I'm going to go from the one I liked least to the one I liked the most. And I think this first one here is a bit of a hot take. I know it's a very popular series, and I'm very sad about not enjoying this one, but up first I have Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This is the 3rd book in the Fourth Wing series. I read Fourth Wing and Iron Flame when they first came out. I buddy read them with friends, and I had a fun time with them. I had complaints, I had nitpicks, but overall it was a good time. It was a great way to turn my brain off after a day of work. And they were great buddy reads. But then I got to this one, and I was very unhappy with how this story turned out. It just felt like almost completely useless information. I ended up giving it 2 stars. I feel like this book had no plot. And something happens at the end of the 2nd book that I thought was going to be the focus of this book, but that ends up really not being the case. That plot line doesn't really progress until the end of this book. So this book felt like a lot of filler. And we had a lot of moments where we had conflicts come up, or there were supposed to be these tense scenes, but they were immediately resolved within a couple of pages. So I felt like there was no tension. There felt like there were no stakes. A flyer or a writer can't date someone that's, ranked above them. Oh, don't worry, we've resolved that. Oh, we've committed treason. Don't worry, we'll resolve that too. And it's like every time that we had a speed bump in the path of the characters, it was just gone, disappeared. And I was so disappointed about that. And I feel like there is no development in the characters or in their relationship. The side characters, who the hell are these people? We've read about them for 3 books now, and I feel like I only really know their names and a fact. I can tell you one thing about each of them, I think. And I want to be more attached to characters by this point. And I don't want to just be negative. I don't want to just dunk on this book, because I do think there were some good scenes here scattered throughout this book. I think her finales are epic, right? She has these good final battles, but I wish that we had more tension, more buildup. I wish that we had multiple battles throughout this book. And I feel like our villains aren't very villainous as well. Like, we have a big bad villain, and I wish we knew more about them. I wish they had more development. And we also learned a little more about the kingdoms surrounding this kingdom that we're in. We learned a little more about the politics, but it felt like it was too little too late almost. And I didn't really feel like it contributed a lot to the story, and I wanted it to. And there was another thing that really bugged me about this, like, why are we still taking classes? Like, I thought that was the point of the last book. So why are we still taking classes? I feel like we're kind of regressing rather than moving forward. And overall, I'm just feeling very disappointed with how this book turned out. I think the dragons are cool. I think the concepts are cool. But as the series progresses, I'm finding more and more things that I dislike about the series. And I think I may be tapping out at this point on the series. I'll wait and see, the reviews for the 4th book and kind of see how everyone takes it. But ultimately, I was not pleased with Onyx Storm, and I don't think I will be continuing. I hope I'm not alone in that, but it seems like a lot of people really loved this book. So I think maybe I have an unpopular opinion there. Up next here, I have The Butcher and the Blackbird by Alex E. Harrow. This is a novella that I got from NetGalley, so big thank you to NetGalley and the publisher for allowing me to have an early copy of this. By the time you're seeing this, it's already out. But this is a novella that is following a storyteller, and she's trying to protect a monster from this knight that slays monsters. And it is a futuristic dystopian. Unfortunately, I did not like this one. I ended up giving this one 2 stars as well. I was really interested in this one because of the subject matter. Like, I love knights, and it had a very cool summary going on. I love the idea of monster hunting, and I've been very interested in Alex E. Harrow as an author. I have heard great things about their books, and I know that they have a very unique writing style, so I wanted to try something smaller like this novella to see if their writing style would work for me. And I do think it was well written. It does have like this fairy tale Witcher vibe to it that I did really enjoy. But ultimately, this novella is only 36 pages. It was just too short for me. I really wanted more. I wanted to feel more of these emotions, and I wanted to know more about this world. Part of it feels like it takes place, in medieval Europe, but it also mentions COVID and climate change and the collapse of our government. So it is futuristic in those regards, and I feel like I didn't really know when I was in time. I feel like it was a bit of like a whiplash moment. It's like every time we got new information, I was like, oh, okay. And we also had a lot of moments where we got some cool information, but it was just like little tidbits here and there. Like, if there was a novel in this world, I would be very interested in that. Up next here, I have Ranger of Marzanna by John Scavron, and in this book we follow 2 siblings who are on opposite sides of the war. We follow Sonia, who is a ranger of Marzanna. She is in training, and her brother Sebastian is fighting for the Empire as a wizard. And ultimately, I really wanted to enjoy this one. I think I started this book really enjoying it, but then as I progressed, things kind of fell off a little for me, and I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. So I really like complex sibling relationships. I love siblings that are on opposite sides of the war. I like this Marzanna goddess, and as her rangers spend more time with her, as she blesses them, they become more animalistic. I thought that was an interesting touch. But ultimately, I feel like we didn't get enough from these characters. I felt very detached from these characters. I didn't feel the emotional pull. Ultimately, they felt very surface level, and I really wanted to dig deeper into these characters. I really wanted to understand their motivations better, because sometimes they made decisions and I didn't really understand why they were making these decisions. So I really wanted to see more of that. And I feel like we also had a lot of time skips in this book, and it felt like we had random time skips over the course of just the chapters, and weeks would pass by and months would pass by very quickly. And as a result, I feel like things just felt incredibly rushed because of that. I feel like when I first started, it was going to be like a steady 3 stars. Like, I was enjoying it. And then once we kind of hit about the halfway point and towards the end, I felt a little disappointed. I was still waiting for more from these characters. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue on with the series or not. I did like the Russian-inspired setting. It's very cold. I did like the descriptions of the cold. And we also have necromancers in this world, which I thought was a nice touch. And there is like one really like very specific nitpick I have, where these characters say random words in Russian just throughout the book. And I hate that. I don't know why. Anytime a book just has random words from another language thrown in, I don't like it. But I didn't deduct any stars for that or anything. It's just like a very specific pet peeve of mine. Up next here, I have Heavenbreaker by Sarah Wolf. And this is a sci-fi novel. We are following Sonali, and she is the illegitimate child of Duke Hauteclair. And this Duke murdered her mother, and so she kills this Duke. and she wants to destroy everyone in his house. And in order to do that, she has to compete against these other nobles in these jousting tournaments, but they joust in these giant metal suits, these giant mech suits in space. So this book is another book that I didn't like. I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. Again, not the best reading month, but I did really like the concepts of this. This book was also pitched as a romantasy, so it was not what I was expecting going into it. This is definitely not romantasy. There is no romance, and it is a science fiction. So do with that information what you will, I guess. This is the same publishing company that published Fourth Wing, and I think they are really bad at labeling their books, or I feel like they have been marketing a lot of their books kind of incorrectly. But I just be aware of that going into this. It is a classic revenge story. I do really like the idea of a revenge story. I love that they are jousting in giant robot suits. Very cool. I love the concepts. I love the ideas here. But again, ultimately this felt very surface level. We have Sonali, and I wanted to feel closer to her. Like, I wanted to feel the rage. She's very angry. She's frequently telling us that she's angry, but I wanted to feel it. I wanted to root for her in her revenge schemes, and ultimately I didn't. And I also feel, and my biggest complaint about this book is the fact that I feel like I couldn't really describe anything in this world to you. But a lot of the information that we get in this book is not expanded upon. I feel like I can't describe anything to you. I feel like I can't really tell you what things look like. And I feel like the battle scenes themselves weren't descriptive enough. Like, I feel like I had a really hard time visualizing these jousting scenes, which is a shame because I did really love the idea of these jousting tournaments. And I feel like the way this was written was very interesting. We have many different POVs, and sometimes we're in first person and sometimes we're in third person. And there were several random POVs that I didn't care about, and I didn't really know what they contributed to the story. Of course, that may be revealed as the story progresses. But either way, I feel like I wasn't really fully sold on the writing style of this either. But there were aspects of this that reminded me of Iron Widow, if you were a fan of that. This next one I have here is actually a reread, and that is East by Edith Petot. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, not sure. I read this one a long time ago, back when I was in elementary school, and I have had the sequel on my shelf for many years. My goal this year was to make sure that I was reading these books that have been on my shelf for a long time. So I decided to go back and reread this one and continue on and read the sequel. However, I have decided that I'm not going to do that now. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I didn't love it as much as I did when I was a kid. It was still an enjoyable read. It is an East of the Sun, West of the Moon retelling. It has similar vibes to Beauty and the Beast. We follow our main character, Rose, and she is taken from her home by a polar bear, and she's trying to figure out his identity. And that's kind of the setup for the story. I feel like this was a very popular book when I was in elementary school. I remember having to wait a long time for this book at the library, and I think I have seen other people on Bookstagram talk about this. So while I did have a fun time revisiting this, I am kind of surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did when I was a kid. It has 5 different POVs, and there are really only like 2 POVs that I care about, sometimes a third POV. And it is a very slow moving story. So I don't know why I loved it so much as a kid. I'm glad that I loved it as a kid. But I don't think I'm going to continue on and read the sequel, just because I feel like this book wrapped up really well on its own. It reads like it's a standalone. The sequel came out 15 years later. And a lot of people said in the reviews that I checked out, said that they didn't like it, that it was basically a repeat of this one. So I'm not going to continue on with the sequel. I'm just going to leave things where they are here. And next up here, I have A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. I gave this one 4 stars. In this one, we follow 14-year-old Mona, and she has bread magic, and she works at her family's bakery, but she kind of gets pulled into this larger plot, and her life kind of gets spun on its head when she discovers a dead body in the bakery. And there is an assassin that is going around this town and killing all of the people with small magics. And it's kind of up to our 14-year-old Mona to save the day, even though she doesn't really want to. And I really loved this story. I feel like this is one of those books that could be read and enjoyed by anyone. I think it has T. Kingfisher's usual flair of, these modern fairy tales. It does feel very cozy. I feel like I would have loved this at the age of 5. I would have, loved this now at the age of 27. And I think it's just a very fun and quick read. I love that our heroes are these people with small magics, and they're not necessarily useful magics, right? Mona can bake bread, and we have a woman who can speak to dead horses, and there's someone who can change the color of fruit, right? So they're not super important or super talented, but they just have these little skills. And I just thought that was so lovely in terms of these characters. And I like that these ordinary, everyday people are kind of having to save the day. And I had a really great time reading this. I mean, we have a gingerbread man familiar. There is a pet sourdough starter. So it's just very quirky, very weird, very fun. I feel like the end was actually pretty emotional. I was actually very sad at the end, and I feel like I wish that this book had been around when I was a kid. I've convinced my sister to read it. It's just a great time if you're looking for something that feels like a fairy tale, or if you're looking for something that feels like cozy fantasy. But do not do it on an empty stomach, though, because I was craving bread the entire time I was listening to the audiobook at work. And lastly here, I have my 5-star read. Very surprising. And that is A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos. And at least I hope that's how you pronounce that. I think it is. I hope so. But this is book 1 of the Mirror Visitor Quartet. And in this book, we follow a young woman named Ophelia. And in this world, God has smashed the earth. And there are floating cities now. And each of these floating cities, called arcs, have their own unique society. They have their own magic system, their own government, their own religions. And we follow our main character, Ophelia. And the arc that she's from has this unique object ability. Her aunt can control paper, and she has an uncle who specializes in metal. But Ophelia is a very powerful object reader. She can touch an object and commune with that object. She can see where it's been. She can convince it to do other things. And she has a scarf that is her familiar. She can also walk through mirrors. And she is forced into a political marriage with a man from another arc. And his name is Thorn. And the arc that he's from is the Arc of Illusions. And his family is known as the Family of the Dragon. And she is forced to marry him and go to this other arc. And she doesn't know anything about this world. It's very different from where she grew up. The government, the religion, and the government of Thorn's arc is based on which family holds the most power. So there are multiple families at play, and they're constantly trying to kill members of the other families to gain more power. And people, owe each other favors. It's a very twisted and manipulative society. And Ophelia is kind of just thrown in the middle of this. She has received no preparation, and she doesn't know who to trust or what's going on. And the people in this world are very harsh. And I will say this book is marketed as YA. I don't agree with that. In this book, she is 18. She is basically an adult at the time this book takes place. And it does have some darker themes. We have themes of torture, sexual assault. There's a lot of violence. So keep that in mind. I do think it could be more for like an upper YA audience, but I do feel like the series will become more adult as it progresses. I also want to say this is not a romance. I feel like one of the things that's kind of putting me off about this series for so long is I feel like I know how that's going to go. Just based on the premise. I have read that before. But that is not the case. Thorn and Ophelia do not like each other. They are strongly opposed to this marriage. They are only doing it because they are being forced to by the political players that govern this world. And they kind of have to reluctantly agree to go through with this. And they're not very nice to one another. Thorn's family in particular is very terrible to Ophelia. And at the end of this book, they're just starting to tolerate one another. But we're on rocky road at this point in time. And I do love that. I love that this book kind of took me by surprise in that regard. It is definitely a slower story. It is a slow burn in terms of the information and the world. I feel like a lot of people could describe this as boring. I wouldn't describe it as boring, but it is really slow. And there were a lot of times when I was like, I don't really know what the point of this is. I don't know why we're moving in this direction. And it wasn't until later that I got answers. So we do have that. And I will say, the best thing about this world is the magic in the world building. I loved the world building. We have these, flying huskies. We have these illusions, and your tattoos identify what family you're on. Ophelia's family, in their religion, they believe that when you die, your soul is left in the objects that you possessed. And houses come to life because of the families that live in them. And I just thought that was such a cool concept. So many things about this world. I have a billion questions. I hope that we explore more of this world, and I do want to see more of these arcs. It is very political. We do have a lot of scheming, a lot of backstabbing going on, and it was really interesting figuring out who to trust and who not to trust. Those are all the books that I read in the month of February. Let me know if you've read any of these or what you read in February, because I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again with another video soon. Goodbye.